Good afternoon and welcome to Module 6, Supportive Services and Follow-up Services and Activities. My name is Jaleesa Martin and I will be your presenter today. In prior modules, we've covered steps 1, 2, 3, and parts of step 4. In this module, we will cover supportive services, which is in step 4, and follow-up services, which is in the final step, step 5. Training objectives. The primary objective is to discuss the federal and state requirements for WIOA supportive services and WIOA follow-up services. The secondary objective is to provide examples and feedback of supportive services and follow-up services. We will discuss things such as what is the definition of supportive services, who is eligible, and scenarios that you may encounter in your local area. We will also discuss the definition of follow-up services and when a follow-up should be completed. Although all youth participants can also receive supportive services and are required to have follow-up services, this module is in reference to our adult and dislocated worker participants. What are supportive services? Supportive services are defined as services such as transportation, childcare, dependent care, housing with certain provisions, and needs-related payments that are necessary to enable an individual to participate in activities authorized under WIOA. Supportive services are reasonable and necessary to enable a WIOA participant who cannot afford to pay for such services to participate in individualized career and/or training services that are funded under WIOA. The provision of supportive services must be determined on an individual basis. Limited supportive services may be provided to individuals receiving basic career services. However, such individuals must be registered as a WIOA participant and they are subject to performance outcomes. It is important to remember that this is not an exhaustive list as supportive services can vary from local area to local area. Supportive services eligibility. Follow-up career services are not a qualifying service of the receipt of supportive services. Therefore, an adult or dislocated worker who is only receiving follow-up services may not receive supportive services. All supportive services must have been approved and recorded in the WorkSource portal prior to the participant receiving or obtaining goods and services. Backdated requests for support services should not be approved. No payment can be made to the participant until that amount has been recorded in the WorkSource portal. Supporting documentation of the participant's qualifying WIOA activity for which the participant is receiving supportive services must also be scanned into the participant's WorkSource portal profile. Remember this, our goal is to provide the appropriate combination of services and support to help ensure success for the participant, regardless of who funds their activity. The allowability of supportive services for co-enrolled participants is what helps us stretch those dollars. Braided funds are well-leveraged funds. Tell the story. Supportive services are meant to support an individual's successful participation in the program. What are supportive services required documentation? Before supportive services are given, there are some required documentation that the local area must provide and document. Please be reminded that specific details of required steps and documentation are governed by local policy. The state policy dictates what a local policy and process must entail, but always look to your local policy for more detailed information. The first required documentation is a financial or physical need. There must be documentation in each electronic case file in the WorkSource portal that participants are incapable of providing these services for themselves. It may be beneficial to look back at information you initially connected to determine the individual's eligibility to help support the need for supportive services. For example, if someone has been determined to be low income or receiving public assistance, then we can clearly point to a financial need. However, the determination of need may not be so cut and dry. Be sure to tell the story in the case notes. The second documentation that is required is a resource coordination. There must be documentation supporting that these services or funds were not available from any other state and or federal grant or program or funding stream agency. Ensuring that other state and or federal funding available to the participant is utilized before we owe dollars allows us to focus on the highest and best usage of these funds. The third type of required documentations is you must document the type of supported service requested and how the supported services will assist their participation in WIOA activities. The fourth and fifth types of supported services required documentation is the amount requested and justification for the amount being necessary and reasonable to enable participation in qualified WIOA activities. You also must establish a time frame that the supported services will be provided to assist participation in WIOA activities. Can you support that the funds being expended are necessary and reasonable to enable participation? Make sure the need is clear within the documentation of the case notes. Different type of allowable and unallowable supported services can include, but not limited to, the following. Unallowable supported services. Payments are not allowed for titled or deeded items or when recovery of the expense is anticipated. Such items include rent deposits or housing deposits, mortgage payments, car payments, purchase of vehicles, and fines. Allowable supported services can include assistance with uniforms or other appropriate work attire and related tools, including eyeglasses and protective ear gear. Tools, work clothing, and boots or shoes required for employment, drug testing required by the employer, financial counseling, and auxiliary aids and services necessary for persons with disabilities to obtain and retain employment. Again, it is important to note that your local policy can be more inclusive or restrictive here. Always refer back to your area supported services policy. Local supported services policy. Although OWD sets the basic requirements for supported services, your local area may be more inclusive or restrictive. It is important to note what OWD requires, but also what your local area's policy is for supported services. During monitoring, we not only check for the requirements that are set by the federal and or state policy, but we also look to make sure local areas are adhering to their own policy. This is something that needs to be taught with new employees and refreshed for freshman employees to ensure policy adherence. Needs-related payments. Needs-related payments are only available to youth, adult, or dislocated worker individuals enrolled in training services. Needs-related payments provide financial assistance to participants for the purpose of enabling them to participate in training. Unlike other supportive services, in order to qualify for needs-related payments, a participant must be enrolled in training. Reminder, local areas must develop a board-approved needs-related payment policy prior to making any such payments. This is not a widely used option and not everyone has this policy, so please be aware of that. The Office of Workforce Development is happy to offer recommendations or pair up local areas wanting to develop these policies with areas who have successfully done so. Please let us know how we can assist you if you would like to develop or revamp your local policy on the needs-related payment. Supportive services for co-enrolled participants. An adult, dislocated worker, or youth program participant may receive supportive services when engaged in individualized career or training services funded by WIOA, One-Stop Partners, or other funding sources, if the services are included in the participant's individual employment plan or individualized service strategy. Supportive services for co-enrolled participants are permitted if, 1, the individual has been determined eligible for WIOA Title I services, and 2, the individual has received or is receiving at least one participation-causing service provided by WIOA Title I. Note, this requirement is minimally satisfied by the development of an IEP or an ISS. And 3, the supportive service provided is allowable under state and local policy. And 4, the need for support is included in the participant's IEP or ISS and documented via a local determination of need form for supportive services, known as the supportive service request forms. Please note that each of these criteria must be met, not just one. Also, the qualifying training program must begin within 30 calendar days. So let's go over some examples of a co-enrolled participant. A co-enrolled participant could be a participant who is enrolled in both the Youth Title I and the Adult Education Title II program, who receives transportation assistance funded by WIOA to attend a training program that is funded by the TCSG Foundation. Or a co-enrolled participant could be an adult program participant with an active IEP that identifies a training need, but their tuition is being fully funded with a Pell Grant. They may receive childcare assistance from WIOA Supported Services to support their participation in their training program. This is a perfect example of how we stretch our WIOA dollars. Surprise, it's quiz time. Let's see how much you know about supportive services. Supportive services do not have to be documented in the WorkSource portal before the participant receives the services. Take just a few seconds to think and put your answer in the chat box. True or false? If you answer false, you are correct. Per 3.4.4 section of the OWD policy manual, all supportive services must have been approved and recorded in the WorkSource portal prior to the participant receiving or obtaining the goods or services. I like to point out that during monitoring, this is something we check for, and your dates should match accordingly along with detailed case notes. Next question. OWD determines the amount and type of supportive services a participant can receive. True or false? Take 10 seconds to answer and put your answer in the chat box. The correct answer is false. OWD does not set the amounts for how much can be given for supportive services. That is the responsibility of the local area. However, whatever that limit may be, it is important for each local area to follow their policy, as that is checked during monitoring. This information can be referenced in the Supportive Services section 3.4.4 in the OWD policy manual. Moving right along, what are follow-up services? Follow-up services are services that are provided to adult and dislocated worker participants who enter employment and all youth participants after exiting their WIOA enrollment. Follow-up services are not to be confused with exit, which is defined as when a participant has not received a service funded by the program or funded by a partner program for 90 consecutive calendar days and is not scheduled for future services. The exit date is the last date of service. Follow-up services happen immediately after exit. While this may seem like an obvious definition or seems geared towards helping us capture our good performance, follow-ups can and should be so much more. Quality versus quantity. This is effectively our last few chances to ensure the needs of the individual have been met before they are officially disconnected from our system. The goal is to ensure adequate service provision with an added bonus of helping us identify information that increases our performance. Case managers should contact the participant at least once a quarter to check in with participants who have obtained employment to see if they need assistance in job retention, wage gains, and career progress. Follow-up needs of the participants must be documented in case notes and the information recorded on the follow-up tab in the WorkSource portal. Best practices could include setting a reminder to contact close pending follow-ups in a reasonable time frame before the due date, making an effort to actually get in contact with the participant instead of just checking for employment, identifying additional needs of the participant during the follow-up service and offering resources within WIOA and in the community. And last but not least, providing great documentation in the case notes that gives all the details of the follow-up. An example of follow-up services. Appropriate follow-up services may vary among different participants. For example, participants with multiple employment barriers and limited work histories may need significant follow-up services to ensure long-term success in the labor market, including program-funded supportive services. Others may identify an area of weakness in your training that may affect their ability to progress further in their occupation or to retain employment. Follow-up services could include but are not limited to additional career planning and counseling, contact with the participant's employer, including assistance with work-related problems that may arise, peer support groups, information about additional education opportunities, limited financial support, and referral to supportive services available in the community. Financial assistance, such as needs-related payments, are not an allowable follow-up service. Timelines for follow-up. Follow-ups are a way to measure outcomes and to make sure that the local areas are receiving credit for those positive outcomes. It is important to start the follow-up process in the quarter immediately following the participant's exits. For example, if a participant exits May 2nd, 2023, then according to the calendar quarters, the first follow-up will be in the next quarter, which would be July through September 2023. The second follow-up will be in the second quarter, which will be October through December 2023. The third follow-up will be in the third quarter, will be January through March 2024. And the last and final follow-up will be completed in the fourth quarter, April through June 2024. As a best practice, pending follow-ups that are due around the holidays or any extended time away from the office should be completed in the earlier part of the quarter to ensure the follow-up is completed before the deadline. Here we are again. It is quiz time. Please place your answer in the chat box. How often should follow-ups be completed? A, whenever you feel like it. B, 1 month after training is complete. C, at least once every quarter for 12 months. Or D, quarterly after supportive services have ended. Take a few seconds to get your answer. The correct answer is C, at least once every quarter for 12 months, beginning the quarter immediately following the exit. For reference, see OWD Policy Manual 3.4.6 Follow-up Services. Also, if you answered A, please contact me after the training and we can talk about it. Later, we will provide a video walkthrough of the follow-up process in the Wards West Georgia portal. We will also provide an example of what a good follow-up should look like. In the 3 pictures above are examples of what the Wards West Georgia screen would show if a follow-up was pending, if a follow-up was late, and if the follow-up was not due yet. If a follow-up is pending, a best practice would be to not wait until the last minute to complete the follow-up, as it may take more than one attempt to reach the participant. As a reminder, a late follow-up is an automatic finding. There are several reasons a follow-up may not be due yet. The participant could still be active or has just exited and the follow-up has not been generated by the WorkSource Georgia portal. Follow-ups are just as important as the initial portion of a participant's journey in WIOA. Late follow-ups was the most given out finding during last year's monitoring. This is an indication that we all should be working towards improving our follow-ups. Now, let's go over some scenarios and let's find out what you have learned. Please place your answers in the chat box. Scenario number 1. John is a current WIOA adult participant. He was in his program for a year. However, due to personal reasons, he is no longer doing well and had to drop out of the program. Will John receive follow-up services? A, no, he did not exit with employment. B, yes, everyone receives follow-up services. C, no, because he is not a youth participant. Or D, yes, all adult participants receive follow-up services. Take some time to gather your answers and please place it in the chat box. The correct answer is A. Follow-ups are not required because he did not exit with employment as stated in OWD Policy Manual 3.4.6 Follow-up Services. But let's please be reminded that this will still impact performance. Unless people drop out of the program for one of the limited number of exclusions, they will still be counted in performance measures. We have to think about the big picture here. Scenario number 2. Lisa finished her LPN program through WIOA as an adult participant and is now in follow-up services. She received supported services throughout the program. She has now found a promising new job and has asked for childcare supported services. Is Lisa eligible for supported services? A, no, WIOA does not offer supported services for childcare. B, yes, she received services before and can again. C, no, she no longer qualifies for supported services. D, yes, because she gained employment through WIOA. Let's take some time to gather your answer and please place your answers in the chat box. If you answer C, you are correct. OWD's policy manual states in 3.4.4 supported services, follow-up career services are not a qualifying service for the receipt of supported services. Therefore, an adult dislocated worker who is only receiving follow-up services may not receive supported services. It is also important to note that we would want to refer the participant to community resources such as CAPS offered by the state. Last but not least, scenario number 3. Tariq is a single dad with a 3-year-old. He does not have a car. He is currently in the one stop to get a referral to GVRA and review labor market employment statistics. Is Tariq eligible for supported services for childcare and or transportation? A, yes, since he is requesting a referral. B, no, he has not yet been determined WIOA eligible and is therefore not eligible for receipt of supported services. C, yes, he's eligible as long as funds are available in his local area. D, no, he has to ask for supported services from GVRA. Take a couple seconds and place your answers in the chat box. The correct answer is B. No, he has not been determined WIOA eligible and is therefore not eligible for receipt of supported services. He is currently only participating in basic career services and is not eligible. This can be referenced in supported services section 3.4.4 of OWD's policy manual. All of the policy information in today's presentation can be found in OWD's policy manual, which is based off federal statutes and guidelines. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us at WIOA programs@tcsg.edu.